don't want to know what I just seen. It's Mountain Devil.
Mountain Devil!
You've been having too much of this moonshine. You want a little snow?
They look like Fred. They have horns.
Was it a boy or a girl, Fred?
Blasted it.
The animal fell into a ravine. Its body was never recovered. The miners slept off the events of their day. It's a far-fetched story. Men attacked and even injured by irate giant apes in the USA. Yet it was taken seriously, reported on the front page of the state newspaper alongside the world news. Could there really be a giant ape living in modern North America? The Pacific Northwest is Bigfoot country. These forests cover 21,000 square miles from Alaska in the north all the way down to California in the south. The shoreline is loaded with shellfish, and each year the rivers are swollen with thousands of spawning salmon. The Kwakiutl Indians once shared the forest with the wolves and bears. Their name for Bigfoot was Bukwas.
The Bukwas is not really mythical. It's an actual being that's taller than a man, covered in hair. And they talk when they used to live out here about picking berries, and a Bukwas would be on the other side of the berry patch picking too. You don't see them very much, but they're out there. In 1993, I went into an anchorage behind my ancestral village with my 3 crew, and just after dark, we heard whistling coming from the shore. And we hit the switch on a spotlight, and there it was, a male and a female, and she automatically dropped into a fetal position, and the male at the same time dropped down to his knees and brought his arm up in front of his face, and you could see the reflection of his eyes, the green reflection from the spotlight. And they just stayed there for 15 or 20 minutes. I had the spotlight on them, and they froze. They did not move. But what I saw on that beach that night was, there was no way it would have been a black or a grizzly bear. I've seen blacks and grizzlies stand. No way could anyone ever say this is a bear to me, because I knew what I saw. It was definitely a Bukwas walking across the beach.
Bukwas, like all wild men, is a potent symbol. And this cultural history stretches back hundreds of years, which is strange because North America has no trace of ape populations, only humans. And population is the key. There must be a whole group of Bigfoot in the forest. So what does a living population of large apes need? Take mountain gorillas as an example. They need food and space. Even here in the rich African rainforest, they need ranges of up to 12 square miles. There are less than 700 mountain gorillas on Earth. Yet even in these thick, inhospitable jungles, they were discovered back in 1902. These days, we know every individual by a given name, so it seems that even shy, remote populations of apes have trouble hiding from science. How often do people come across Bigfoot? In British Columbia, John Green has logged many of the modern encounters, 3,000 in the last 30 years. But he thinks these are only a fraction of the sightings that actually occur. One of them has a piece of film attached, shot in California by the late Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin in October 1967.
This is the start of the roll that they eventually got the picture of the creature on. They're just riding their horses up the bed of Bluff Creek. There's Bob now with the pack horse.
It all looks a bit like a home movie, but then, with just a minute left on the film, it changes dramatically. Whatever your first impression of this footage, there's no in-camera trickery. Examining the film shows that something really walked in front of Patterson's camera. And let's be clear on one thing. This footage either has to be a hoax or the most important piece of wildlife film ever. That's the footage. Here's the story that goes with it. It was around 1 p.m. on October 20th, 1967. Patterson and Gimlin were riding north up the Bluff Creek in California.
Whoa! Bob, look it!
They rounded a bend and saw the creature. Patterson pulled out the camera from his saddlebag and began filming. After about 11 seconds, he began to run closer, and as he did, Bob rode closer still, within 60 feet of the creature, covering Roger with his rifle until the creature walked away.
We got it!
Using a computer, we've stabilized the film so it's easier to see. It looks like a man in a suit, but so would the Bigfoot of legend. The question is, which is it? From what we can see, the fur is pretty convincing. It flows correctly down the back, and in some places you can apparently see muscles moving under the skin. But to react to the arrival of two excited men on horseback by just strolling off is very strange behavior for a shy wild animal. Film is one thing, but animals leave traces, and there were footprints in the creek sand. They were deeper than the ones left by Bob's horse when he rode alongside the trail. Their combined weight was almost 1,500 pounds. The depth of the prints suggests the creature was even heavier, yet the average weight for a male gorilla is 400 pounds. Roger reloaded his Kodak and filmed them. Then they took plaster casts. Some measured 15 inches.
This is perhaps the best of those casts. You have to remember that the track is not the shape of the foot necessarily, it's the shape that the foot made in the ground. This one, for instance, it looks as if it had stepped on something, but in fact that's just the way it drove the heel in and then shifted the weight to the front of the foot.
The tracks are varied, but very natural, and with the dynamics of a flexible walking foot. But the depth suggests the creature was over 3 times the weight of a gorilla the same size, and Patterson's film of them has vanished. So, is there more biological evidence about these creatures? The forests stretch south from British Columbia through Washington State and Oregon to California, and John Green has investigated many stories from the 60s and 70s. 70 years of stories about Bigfoot have failed to produce a single credible photograph, let alone a body. So, we're back to footprints. In 1969, near Bossburg, Washington, there were a staggering 1,089 of them, left in mud and snow. The tracks of a very long-legged creature, but curiously, also a crippled one. Its right foot had twisted toes and misplaced bones, something that would be unusual, yet very natural. At Washington State University, the prints have been studied by primate anatomist and Bigfoot author Dr. Grover Krantz. Footprints are just dents in the ground, but they can tell an expert about the foot that made them.
From the position of these bulges, I was able to deduce the position of some of the key bones in the center of the foot, and then reconstruct all the bones of the foot, and found most interesting that the center of weight of the ankle was substantially forward of where it is in a human foot. If we had an erect biped 8 feet tall, and it was going to walk in a human manner, how much farther forward would the ankle have to be placed? I did some simple arithmetic calculations on that, got an exact answer. Then I went back and measured my reconstruction. It was exactly correct. That was enough for me to be absolutely sure that those feet were made by a living creature.
Is there no way these could be hoaxed?
If the Bossburg tracks of the crippled individual were made by a hoaxer, there are several considerations. One is that he had to know human anatomy with great detail, he had to be able to devise distortions of the anatomy, and he had to calculate exactly how an enlarged individual would have to be constructed in order to walk properly. That requires an elaboration of thought and knowledge that I don't think anybody in the world has.
John Green was the first to investigate the Bigfoot film. He reconstructed the event just 9 months later. This is Jim McLaren, 6 foot 5 inches tall, walking the same route as the Bigfoot. He'd been to Bluff Creek when the tracks were still plainly to be seen, so he knew the route it took. With a digital effects device, we can precisely match the 2 separate pieces of film and show that the creature was only a bit taller than McLaren and definitely bulkier. But the footprints make it 4 times heavier. The movement has always been controversial as well. Grover Krantz thinks that the gait of the creature is definitely inhuman.
The Patterson subject walks with the body leaning forward and the knees largely bent, so that when it takes a step, it supports the leg with a bent knee and keeps 2 feet on the ground for an unusual length of time. It also lifts the foot very high behind each step, like so. In addition to all those things, it also swings the arms, which is very difficult to imitate, like this. Well, this is something I can do for a few steps very poorly, but the Patterson subject did it for over 300 feet. I doubt that any human being could be trained to do that.
It seems that everything about Bigfoot leads to that footage. So what about the location? Bluff Creek in Northern California. Because if this was a hoax, it was a good one, and details like the right location would be essential to its success. So what are the options? Roger and Bob are innocent. They were hoaxed by a separate party dressed in a suit. But how could they guarantee a meeting in a suitable spot, and more importantly, be sure not to get shot? Both men were armed, and remember, only a body will ever satisfy science. Could Roger and Bob have set the whole thing up themselves and made the suit? Well, Roger was a resourceful man with lots of contacts, but the suit is too good, which suggests professional special effects design. Grover Krantz says the walk isn't human, but he can almost do it. So was there a third man? A director of the action? There was certainly money to be made. After the film was first seen, a TV company in Los Angeles offered Roger $50,000 for the rights. A modern equivalent would be over $250,000. Could Roger have been employed to film the creature? Even told to use a partly exposed roll of film and take Bob Gimlin along to corroborate the story? Option 3 has Roger leading Bob into an event he's rehearsed, a performance. And Roger was in control. The two men had conspicuously agreed not to shoot the creature unless it attacked them. Bob Gimlin doesn't talk to the media, but in 1992 recorded the story of October 20th for his friend John Green.
Well, starting out early in the morning, I left early in the morning, and of course Roger slept in, and my horse loosened his shoe up, so I come back in to tack the shoe on tighter, and Roger was gone. I got back, and
so Roger and Bob were apart on the morning before the filming.
Well, he asked me what area I had covered that morning, and I told him. He said, well, why don't we ride up in this area that we had ridden.
And Roger led Bob out in the afternoon. It's a vital detail, but Bob still maintained that what he saw was an animal. He hasn't spoken to the media for 13 years, but he was the crucial eyewitness. On the phone, he was willing to accept the theory that he had been fooled.
When I first saw this thing, well, it was just like the adrenaline flew, you know. I mean, I was shocked, excited, just like, golly, then they do exist, you know. At one time in my life, right shortly after the film footage, I was totally convinced that no one could fool me. And, of course, I'm an older man now, and I see a lot of things, and I think there could have been a possibility. But it would have had to have been really well planned by Roger, and I feel that they would have had to have been very, very careful, because I had a .30-06 loaded with 180 grain bullets. And had that thing have turned and rushed me, I would have shot it. So I feel that if that was a hoax, somebody was taking an awful big chance with their life.
Maybe that's why the creature just walked away. And what a brilliant piece of casting. Honest Bob, the eyewitness. So how would the hoax have been created? The first job is to find out more about the suit. In Burbank, California, Optic Nerve Studios specializes in building creatures around people. It's run by John Bulich.
In my mind, it's undoubtedly a suit. It has all the earmarks of being a guy in a suit. Generally, what we would build is a two-layered suit. We would have a musculature underneath where the muscles are actually separate pieces sewn together so they can slide up against each other the way muscles would on a real person. And then on top of that, the fursuit goes on as a separate layer. So we get some kind of sliding in between the fur and the muscles that does tend to look more natural.
And what about the locomotion? How easy would that be for a man?
To my mind, the movements of this creature are nowhere near as dramatically different as a man playing a gorilla or chimpanzee. You're talking about very, very different body language, very different style. And so if a human being can master that type of movement, he can certainly master this that much easier. And I think an amateur would be able to achieve this kind of locomotion very easily.
A lot of expertise is required to make a convincing suit.
It's made from a spandex undersuit, and onto that we put a real animal hair, in this case a yak hair.
What about the body shape?
They're simply foam pads sewn with a spandex material to enlarge the collarbone, the biceps, the calves, and so on.
Detail is the key, but for Bigfoot, eyes are less important than feet.
If you wanted a greater impression, you'd simply put a stiffer material into the bottom.
And finally, someone has to be able to work with the suit.
One of the things I noticed is that as he steps down, it tends to break at the knee.
And if the suit and movement can be reproduced, so can the event. Using the same distances recorded at Bluff Creek, the same camera and lens, and an amateur operator, it's possible to exactly recreate the action of 1967.
Action!
The most important revelation of this exact recreation is how close Roger and Bob were to the creature. They were right on top of it, which makes the behavior even less natural. It walked away, utterly unconcerned.
So, did you get it?
Yeah, I reckon I did.
And this is the footage. At this distance, with this lens, you're certain to get the creature in the frame, unless you artificially wobble the camera. Even so, it's conveniently difficult to see much detail in the suit. It's very neat. The whole thing was beautifully designed. Suit, location, camera work. Nowadays, a lot of commercials deliberately use confusing, shaky camera work, but they always have an image that sells the product, like frame 352. I'm Bigfoot. Buy me. And millions of people have. It's not possible to explain the sightings in the woods, but it is the film which has sustained their association with a thing called Bigfoot. And now there's a strong case that Bigfoot simply doesn't exist. The Bigfoot of legend runs contrary to primate physiology and the fossil record. And Patterson's footage is most likely a brilliant hoax. Even Bob Gimlin, the only man who saw what Patterson filmed, has serious doubts. So unless these forests reveal a creature that rewrites the rules of biology, this is the end of the road. In 1970, Don Whillans led the reconnaissance for a British climb on Mount Annapurna.
We were moving through deep snow, and it was fairly exhausting. The evening we set up base, we just put our packs down to make camp, when there was a commotion at the back of me. I turned round just in time to see something drop out of sight behind the ridge. But night was coming, so I put it to the back of my mind. I had to get up. I had this strange feeling that if this creature was still around, it would show itself. It was daylight practically. The moon was so bright, and I saw a dark patch in the shadows. I definitely saw it move, and I got the impression it was an ape-like creature. I watched it for almost 10 minutes. Then, as if it knew it was being watched, it dropped out of sight.
In the book, that is the Book of Known Animals, there are just 4 types of great ape: orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and us. And the remarkable thing is that we humans are so similar to the others. In fact, we share 99% of our genes with them. So maybe it's not too surprising that there are so many legends of hominid primates in cultures around the world. Big hairy monsters and wild men. Here in Nepal is the most famous of all those legends, that of the abominable snowman, or the Yeti. It is deeply ingrained in the culture here, and its popularity has spread ever since Western mountaineers first brought back tales of their encounters with these animals, high in the Himalayas. It is a huge area, but above 16,000 feet, it is desolate. The story starts much lower down. Here, there are places where animals live, and places where the modern world stops. All movement above this altitude is on foot. It's like stepping back hundreds of years. It may seem strange to be searching for a myth when so many known real animals are difficult enough to find. But this quest isn't trying to find the Yeti, but to evaluate the possibility of its existence in purely biological terms, high up in Sherpa country. The culture here is so different from the West. There's a real sense of spiritual harmony with nature and the landscape. The Sherpas say the Yeti represents a very potent force of the mountains, a destructive force. And separating this supernatural aspect from a biological reality is tricky. Local elder Lakbra Dohma has the Sherpa view.
I think it's a very rare animal. We are surprised to why we see a real Yeti in this, if it lives in this region. But everybody believes it's a very rare animal, so it's very hard to see.
How much contact is there? Well, there is one extraordinary story. Lakbra Dohma says that in 1974, she didn't just see a Yeti, she was brutally attacked by one. It was Lakbra's brother who found her a few hours later. So is that firm evidence of a primate living here? Back in Kathmandu, George Schaller, a brilliant field naturalist and zoologist of world renown, had a fascinating view of the potential existence of Yeti.
During the Pleistocene, based on fossils found in China and Vietnam and so forth, a gigantic ape lived in the region. Nobody is sure exactly what it lived on, but most likely lived on a combination of meat and vegetable matter.
This is Gigantopithecus, and it might have lived alongside humans. In a storytelling culture that stretches back into history, could the Yeti legends be based in fact? More importantly, could a whole population have remained hidden all these years? Well, George has spent the last decade tracking one of the most elusive animals on Earth.
The snow leopard lives in the high mountains where it can see a person approaching miles away. And it can crouch down and you can walk within a few feet of it and never see it. Or it moves off quietly like a cloud shadow, like a wisp of smoke.
Even local naturalists only glimpse these animals once every couple of years. So could the Yeti be just as shy? If an ape is here, it's got to be in the forest, because that's the only place it could hide, and the only place it would find any food. In summer, this forest is quite a pleasant environment. It has a limited diversity of plants, an effect of high altitude, but it is surprisingly productive. There's plant food in the form of leaves, nuts, and berries, and small animals too. But the growing season is very short. Come here in winter, and conditions are extremely hostile. The few species of animal that do live here have either moved lower or hibernated. If an ape population had evolved here, it's living in some of the harshest conditions that any primate possibly could. But if the Yeti has overcome these obstacles of physiology, metabolism, and ecology, where is the evidence for its existence? Strangely, most of it comes from higher up in the mountains, way above the tree line in the form of footprints. Don Whillans was one of the many Western explorers this century who have discovered footprints, and they have remarkable consistencies. They are nearly always bipedal. These famous prints were photographed by Eric Shipton, published in 1953. They stretched for over a mile. In 1985, a British expedition even filmed a trackway of huge footprints. But there's a problem. Impressions left in snow will thaw out during the daytime when the sun shines, and then refreeze again at night. And this changes the shape and size of the print. Even the prints left by snow leopards can become gigantic. The only evidence that's going to convince a scientist is a body, skin and bones. Thankfully, the Yeti are so revered up here that relics that are alleged to be pieces of Yeti are preserved in monasteries. This is supposedly a Yeti hand in the monastery at Tengboche, but it was stolen. A fire destroyed another relic, leaving the monastery at Kumjung housing the only artifact in the whole region. It's one of the Sherpa religion's most revered relics, supposed to be a Yeti scalp. The most famous of all Himalayan mountaineers, Sir Edmund Hillary, managed to take this scalp back to the West for testing. The verdict? Sarau, a Himalayan goat antelope. But 30 years ago, they used a relatively crude form of testing, just examining the hairs under a microscope. With the advent of infallible DNA analysis, it's now possible to do a better test than in the 60s, if the monastery is prepared to release the scalp again. But Tenzing, the leader of the village committee, rejected that idea.
Now all of young generation are getting confused, whether it is a Yeti scalp or other animals' skin. So that is why we are not happy to send this other country to test and make the Yeti name turn into the other animal.
So the relics don't prove anything biological, but the Sherpas aren't concerned either way. For them, the Yeti is a symbol, and that's very obvious at their annual festival, the Dumji. During the ceremony, the sacred scalp is worn by a man. Once he has placed it on his head, he represents the spirit of the Yeti. The Yeti is a bad spirit, sent by the gods to punish humans for their misdeeds. The Yeti is driven out of the village, and the bad spirits are exorcised by the symbolic burning of an effigy. So the Yeti is a bogeyman. It's a footprint of Orang Pendek, the short man, and it's excited one of the world's leading primate scientists, David Chivers.
The footprints are amazing in the mixture of ape and human features blended together It's retained some of the grasping abilities of the apes, but also got a sort of flat-footed version of the human foot. And this enables it to walk upright.
So now there's a team looking for the animal, funded by the world's oldest conservation charity, Fauna and Flora International. And this is where they're looking, Kerinci Seblat in Sumatra. We don't know much about this forest, but one thing's for sure, it's not a snow desert like Nepal.
The forests of Southeast Asia, particularly Sumatra, are so complex and diverse, and still extensive, that it's quite feasible that there's a species of ape that's eluded discovery.
But it has been seen. Team member Debbie Martyr first saw the animal in 1993.
It walked straight across the valley in front of me, 30 meters away. So close and so clear. Didn't expect to see it. Certainly didn't expect to see it that clearly. And just walking between these two trees, vegetation to about hip level, this gorgeous, graceful, very strongly built primate, big ape, walking out of a legend and into broad daylight, lit up by the sun, and the disbelief of seeing this thing. And if I'd seen it concealed in undergrowth, I could have said, well, I saw something. But I didn't see something. I saw an orang pendek walk across the valley, just 30 meters away from me.
Debbie's main task now is to follow up sightings and encounters. As with the Yeti, the orang pendek is very much a reality for the local people. They often see the creature on the edge of the forest, in the ladang farms, and their descriptions are consistent.
Ya terus ke sungai ini. Ya rumput ada yang setinggi ini, alang-alang namanya ya. Nah, dia itu megang-megang itu.
Okay. Cyril, bagaimana?
And in the local town, Sungai Penuh, this artist, Pak Jasa, has drawn these pictures. They represent hundreds of reports from people who, like Debbie, have encountered the animal.
Well, it looks, I didn't see this animal this closely. It's not bad, the back of the head, and the head coming down like this, the back of the skull down here, is protruding down here. Yeah, it's not bad, it's not bad.
Here, there are also people who share the habitat of the ex-creature. Pak Buyang had a story to recount.
Iya, panjang. Gimana panjang di badan sini? Semua panjang. Semuanya panjang. Ada yang lebih panjang atau yang lebih pendek? Enggak. Sama saja. Sama saja. Nampak muka bentuknya apa? Atau tidak lihat? Mukanya itu seperti nampaknya seperti beruang. Seperti beruang. Iya.
So, could he have got it wrong?
Enggak, kita sudah paham beruangnya.
If the orang kubu know there's a special animal in this forest, they haven't been able to take Debbie to see one. But that's just one of a whole list of frustrations. Getting into the realms of hard scientific evidence is really tough. Debbie's been trying for the best part of 4 years, since that sighting turned her world upside down. The team has recorded a lot of footprints, and sometimes they're found as long, continuous tracks. They all have the features of upright walking that so excited David Chivers.
You can actually see the movement of the foot. You've got the toes, 1, 2, 3, 4 toes. This is a large primate, and its foot doesn't approximate in any way to any other primate that's known in these forests.
One thing that would identify a new species is DNA, but that requires absolute sterility. In these conditions, that's practically impossible.
What we're looking for is DNA from the gut wall of the animal, which we can then get analyzed.
So far, none of the lab analysis has worked, but then everything here is against the odds. You can only search a few feet from a path, and unlike Nepal, where a body would be frozen, here evidence will disappear long before it can be found. When something dies, it can disappear overnight. It's so hot, so moist, with fungi and insects feasting on a banquet of decomposition. The team is slowly piecing the evidence together and gaining experience. David Chivers feels the search is still worthwhile.
Given the frequency of these sightings, there's got to be something out there that is incredible. Will make a real tremendous discovery. A new ape for a new millennium.
But will it take that long to find? The footprints are inexplicable, with all the characteristics of a bipedal ape. Could it be a subspecies of a known primate? Orangutans are the most likely relative, but they are tree dwellers. That's where most of the food is in the forest. But the orang pendek foot hasn't given up its grasping shape. It would still be useful in the trees, and at the same time, it's not a zoological impossibility for an orangutan to walk upright. Under unusual conditions, they can be bipedal, if a little clumsy. So could a related species have evolved to walk more efficiently than this? There are footprints like the orang pendeks. This is an ex-circus chimp that has been trained to walk fluidly. Why are these images so repulsive and chilly? It's only a trained chimp, but simply by walking upright it becomes too close to us, too human. But this footage is also evidence. Apes can walk upright. But if it is out there, how can anyone prove the existence of an unknown animal? With a photograph. Jeremy Holden is the team photographer and an avid naturalist who has had his own sighting of the animal.
Well, I saw Orang pendek in 1994 in a location not far from where we are at the moment. I had a view from about 5 meters, quite close, but unfortunately at that time I didn't get a picture, and we still have yet to photograph Orang pendek. As you can see here, the jungle's pretty dense, and it's very difficult for photography. Even something 20 meters away is almost impossible to see. We also have a lot of problem with rain, bad light, fungus in lenses, condensation. In fact, I'd go as far as to say the Sumatran rainforest is really a photographer's nightmare.
But Jeremy has taken these pictures of the local tigers, animals that are rarely seen, using a technique that avoids human contact.
Basically, we're just using a off-the-shelf infrared unit here, fitted onto an ordinary 35mm compact camera, which has been specially adapted to fire when the infrared beam here is broken by anything passing along the trail.
And there are pictures of animals more elusive and mysterious than tigers.
This one is even rarer, clouded leopard. And we've managed to photograph 3 individuals, maybe 20 images we have of these now, which again is a great achievement. This was a project first. It's a melanistic golden cat, an animal which I did manage to actually see, but only the one time. Whereas with this, the Sumatran tapir, something the size of a buffalo, black and white, you would imagine highly conspicuous and not very intelligent, but in 3 years traipsing around the forest I've never managed to see one, despite having made maybe 60 images of 20 individuals. And then we have this very poor quality photograph, but it shows a giant pitta, which is a small terrestrial forest-living bird which has never been recorded in the national park and has not been recorded in Sumatra even for well over 100 years.
This is a picture of an animal that one could reasonably call extinct. Will the same technique record one which supposedly doesn't exist?
If we're going to get a picture of Orang pendek, if we're going to prove it exists, this is the way we're going to do it.
Surely this is our best chance for an ex-creature. Thousands of square miles of the world's richest and most productive habitat. A wilderness which is yet to be explored and one of the easiest places for an animal to hide. It is a place where a small group of people have already found animals that were thought not to exist here. So maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe next year, somewhere out there in the mist, a camera will flash in the gloom, and Orang Pendek will go from being an ex-creature to the next creature.
Up next, witnesses are powerless, firemen are baffled. What makes some people suddenly engulfed in blue flames? Is it a case of spontaneous human combustion? Find out on Science Mysteries and uncover more scientific mysteries. Just click at discovery.com. This has been a presentation of the Discovery Channel and the BBC, world-class television.